Well, let's return to energy now. Joining me now is the Climate Policy Director at the Australian Industry Group, Tennant. Tennant, let's look at the complexity of what is being proposed here and what will pass through Parliament. I mean, before this was agreed to, you're looking at the least worst option of price caps and some kind of subsidy relief, but it's looking pretty messy at the moment. Was this really the least worst option?
So it's certainly the case that none of the available response options to the extraordinary price increases that have been coming towards us ever since the invasion of Ukraine, none of those options looked very appetising. Large, expensive public subsidies to energy users, sustained for several years, costing many billions of dollars, needing to be funded somehow, many people suggesting export profits taxes, or export controls that cut back our exports of gas and of coal in the midst of a global energy crisis, also an extremely controversial idea, or regulation of the prices themselves. So the government has opted for the regulatory option. That certainly has a lot of hairs on it. The emergency price caps for gas for the next 12 months will give way, as we understand it, to price elements in a mandatory code of conduct that in turn, the Treasury suggests, will no longer be needed once the ramifications of the war in Ukraine have faded in global energy markets.
Okay,
so that is a lot.
Who knows when that will be? So, this could persist
Not
for years
for several
and years.
years.
Yeah, that's exactly right. I mean, it is difficult for anyone to get their head around how all this works. But first things first, the status quo couldn't remain. It would have been inflationary. Right. Energy goes through almost every element of our economy, and there would have been an inflationary effect right down the line. And I think the warnings about job losses in manufacturing weren't hyperbolic at all. But we have this situation there where the government, and I think they think it's good PR at the moment, and it probably is with voters, they're taking on the energy companies. The energy companies are saying, well, we're suspending our negotiations, we're worried about capital investment, all that kind of stuff. Is that a game of chicken, or is that well-founded?
So there's no doubt that Australia is going to need a lot of investment in our energy system to execute the transition to net zero emissions and to seize the opportunities that many see for us to be a clean energy superpower. That is not going to just involve domestic capital. It's certainly not going to involve just public money. So it is important that Australia retain a reputation as a good place to do business. But we do need to put this in perspective. Every country in a position to act in response to the global energy crisis is acting. It is absurd to think that an Australian government would simply sit back and let tens of billions of dollars of additional cost fall onto businesses and households with no response. So it is good that there is a legislated framework for this rather than a completely unpredictable and make it up as you go along.
I mean, it's hugely interventionist at Tennant. Can you explain something to me? And am I right to assume that these price caps and this reasonable price mechanism, which is completely lacking in detail at the moment, I've got to say, is that just for the supply of the domestic market? Can these companies still charge whatever they want on the international market?
They can charge whatever that market will bear.
Okay.
And
that doesn't seem that bad then, does it?
Well, gas exports from the eastern half of the country are 3 times the size of all domestic consumption. So they will be having a very profitable 2020s. They will be fine. We do need to treat investors with respect, but that includes investors in the 99% plus of Australian businesses who are not gas producers.
Let me ask you one final question, because we all know we're in this transition period. It's going to cost billions and billions of dollars to move to renewables and scale back coal and gas. In the meantime, we have politicians say renewables are the cheapest form of energy possible. That may be true, but that's not quite true yet, is it?
Well, it's more complicated than what is the cheapest generator of a megawatt hour in a year when you don't particularly care when that energy arrives. A system requires a lot of different parts in it to make it work. You can't just say, we'll pick the cheapest thing and we'll have 100% of that, please. So renewables are great. Cost reductions have been extraordinary in the past decade, but we need transmission lines to connect them up. We need energy storage of different sorts. We need demand response. We are going to need gas peaking plants for quite some time to come as a flexible source of energy and as a backup. That'll be probably the last role for gas generators to go, backup for rare periods when you're without the ordinarily expected levels of renewables generation for days or a week or two at a time. Doesn't happen often, matters when it does happen. So renewables are going to dominate our system, very likely, but it is a lot more complicated than just more renewables is always better. It matters where you put them, how cheaply you can finance them, and how smartly you can connect them up.
Tennant, thanks so much for explaining all of that to us. It is certainly a complicated area. We appreciate your time.
It's a pleasure to be with you, and we'll be watching the electricity futures over the next few days to see if they continue the plunge that they've been on for the past few days. They're going down quite a lot.
Yeah, that's right. Okay, I can't say I'll be watching very closely, but I'm relying on you to be doing that, Tennant. Thanks so much. We'll see you soon.